We understand today that there are multiple intelligences, and people have varying capacities. For example, Denise, my wife, is people smart, with finely honed emotional intelligence, but she can easily get lost in a new place. I have to practice harder at being people smart, but I really get lost in a new place or lose my sense of direction. Now, many might say that because I am an architect, I ought to have visual spatial intelligence. Now, visual spatial intelligence helps us navigate, visualize, recognize patterns, and situate ourselves. But I ask you, does visual spatial intelligence help us to design holistic and sacred spaces? So what is sacred space? For me, a sacred space is a place that makes me feel wonderful. Often, it's a place of daydreaming that encourages me to dwell. To dwell means to remain for a time, to keep the attention directed. To dwell is to be mindful. Now, as mortals, we dwell on the earth for a time. A sacred space is an intimate space that intensifies our feeling of connectedness to the wholeness of life. Now, philosopher Martin Heidegger wrote about the purpose of dwelling. He said, "Dwelling is never thought of as the basic character of human being. I agree that thinking and dwelling are inescapably related to each other. How we think affects the way we dwell, which in turn shapes our spaces. This is why I believe sacred spaces serve to remind us of who we are and our purpose for dwelling." My sacred space as a child was the farm shed. The shed, an elemental shelter of columns, corrugated iron roof, and minimal walls. A structure open to nature like an ancient Greek temple. The heart of the shed was the productive corner, where the hardwood tree trunk slab of the workbench lay solid like a pagan altar. Pigeonhole shelving bounded the bench. The pigeonholes were filled with boxes and unknown things that only the passage of growth and height would reveal. This was a place of making, fixing, and discovery, a place where, when alone, I felt free to be myself, to dwell, imagine, play, and build. Now, I invite you to close your eyes for a moment. I want you to recall from your childhood your sacred space that made you feel wondrous to be alive. Now focus on the qualities of this place. What do you smell? What do you hear? What does the space look like? The space you felt free to be and dwell. Now keep your eyes closed until I say otherwise. Raise your hand if your sacred space was natural, somewhere in the landscape. Keep your hands up. Now raise your hand if your sacred space was human-made. Keep your hands up. Now raise your hand if your sacred space was make-believe. With your hands still in the air, open your eyes and look around. It seems from where I can see, we all have sacred spaces. Now, the need for sacred spaces in our daily lives was actually recognized by ancient civilizations, both from the East and West, as a natural part of the human condition. For example, ancient Greek and Indic cultures incorporated sacred spaces within their city planning. The Greeks' preferred way to live in the polis during the classical age integrated material and spiritual needs by emphasizing public space and civic buildings. Both were spatially organized carefully with the topography and its cultural and spiritual significance. In the Hindu practice of architecture and city planning, Vastu Vida, the purpose was to create a built environment that provided harmony, to help individuals attain a peaceful mind and a state essential for good biological health. The patterning of the Vastu city, based on the Vastu Purusha Mandala, is likened to replicating fractal geometry. And like the cosmos, the city expresses parts within a whole. Now, many have argued that the scientific and industrial revolutions which underpin our modern Western worldview siloed knowledge, reduced the cosmos to a soulless clockwork machine, which in turn eroded and impoverished traditional ways of dwelling, thinking, and building. In the age of industrialization, the zoning plan segregated spatial land uses, diluting diversity and vibrancy. Moreover, the discipline of urban planning has no notion of the spiritual city or an understanding of sacred spaces. I realized as a student that our Western ways of thinking, dwelling, and building on this earth are out of whack with the cosmos. Our systems continue to be harmful and wasteful, pushing the planet towards so many ecological tipping points and towards irreversible collapse. Oops, change. I was not to be so negative. Slipped out. Sorry, Vivian. So what do we need to support the making of holistic and sacred spaces? Mortals must ever learn to dwell, so we must search anew for the nature of dwelling as our knowledge of the cosmos evolves. Now, I'm going to give you a metaphor called flatland. I invite you to sense this metaphorical space. Flatland represents the idea that our knowledge is somehow impoverished. It is missing some critical dimension or ways of knowing that provide fullness or wholeness. So, to use an analogy, flatland is like this. You live in a 4-story house of wonders, but you limit your occupation, your dwelling, to the ground floor, the material level. You choose not to think about the 4th level, the metaphysical. You may visit occasionally the 2nd and 3rd levels, the bioecological and socio-cultural realms respectively. Your existence and opportunities in life become flattened to the level on which you dwell. Japanese architect Tadao Ando says it clearly. Flat information begets flat life, begets flat architecture without feeling. So a downward spiral of regression occurs, where in our flattened existence, where we consume space rather than dwell within it, we so easily stop feeling. We stop remembering the richness of all the aspects of ourselves. We forget that we shape our spaces, and thereafter our spaces shape us. And with our rationality, we are so good at defining spaces, except the one most important in this age to get us out of the downward spiral, the sacred space. Now, when designing, I use multiple techniques to reintegrate the other levels of reality with the material level so that we flip out of flatland and dwell in holism. You experienced one method earlier, which I always use with my clients, guided meditation. For me, holism is the practice of understanding the nature of the cosmos. Now, the cosmic reality is that we dwell in multiple spaces simultaneously. Being conscious of this reality immediately creates a shift in the way that we build and inhabit space. Enough mental preparation. It's now time for a demonstration. To design a holistic space, You need 4 levels of reality, or holons of being. The physiosphere, biosphere, noosphere, and theosphere, which relate to the levels of matter, body, mind, and spirit, respectively. Matryoshka dolls are a good analogy of the concept of nested holons of being. The first holon, the physiosphere, encompasses all energy and matter in the universe, which are at the core. The second holon, the biosphere, encompasses ecologies. Humans and all living species cannot exist without energy or matter. The noosphere, the realm of thoughts and beliefs. Now, cultures and ideas cannot exist without people building and dwelling in ecologies. The fourth holon, the theosphere. Spirit of place cannot exist without collective cultural memory and all the deeper layered ecological and material dimensions within. Here we need to acknowledge that any space may become sacred through the mindfulness of the dweller. Now, the fourth holon needs the third holon, needs the second holon, needs the first holon. When the holons are aligned, we have fuller meaning in our life. We become conscious of what we need to holistically dwell on this planet. This consciousness gives purpose to our dwelling. So what does this mean for me as a person, me as an architect, and to you? Modern Western thinking has passed its use-by date. It drove dumb, myopic design that separated us from our living world to the extent that our dwelling or inhabitation now threatens the planet's biosphere. Our dwelling, our building, our spaces now need to heal across multiple levels of reality. We have to relearn how to make sacred spaces to reconnect people to themselves and to the oneness of the cosmos. So what can we all do? Think about how you dwell as a mortal on this planet. How are you going to leave your legacy as a custodian? If your spaces are so cluttered or clumsy that you cannot dwell, then find and create your own private sacred space, an empty space, that when you dwell makes you feel intimately connected to the wholeness of life. Next, consider your workplaces and schools. See how sacred spaces can be incorporated in them. When you've done that, then look outward to your community and see if communal sacred spaces exist. If not, create one with like-minded neighbours and your council. It can take many forms: a simple seat under a tree looking out to sea, spaces to observe nature's patterns and Earth's ancient lessons. Create an artwork, mandala, or labyrinth. Focus on the making, not just the end result. I leave you with another quote from architect Tadao Ando. He says, "Japanese architecture has always learned from nature, so it has empty spaces. If a space is empty, has almost zero in it, even if it has nothing at all, it still creates a universe. We've learned that from nature."